I want to tell you a little bit about what we're all about as a company, where we're going in the next 10 years, and how we're going to actually get there. So we call that our mission, vision, and strategy. And I'm going to start off by just telling you a story. So when I was in college, I started a company with my roommate. It was a tutoring company. We got a bank account set up. We started to have some money flowing through it. And one day I got a call from the bank. And they started asking me all these scary questions. Are you an aggregator of funds? Are you a high-risk merchant? Do you have this policy and procedure in place? And do you have this license? And I was kind of taken aback. I mean, I almost felt like I was being treated like a criminal or something. I felt like I was trying to do something good for the world, and suddenly I was facing this inquisition of questions. Fast forward a few years later, I was a software engineer at Airbnb. We were moving money to 190 countries all over the world. And this is a photo of Cuba, of Havana. One day, somebody came and they tapped me on the shoulder and they said, "We need to turn off all the listings in Cuba." And I was kind of upset about that because these were people who had opened their homes to strangers from all over the world. And there was this rule, this regulation that US companies, we couldn't do business with them, and we had to turn them all off and affect their livelihood. So throughout my life, this was just two small examples, but there were many little examples like this. Whether it was, something got messed up on my credit score, or I was trying to, I had a bank overdraft fee, or I was trying to send money somewhere and my credit card got declined. I always had this visceral sense that there was something really broken and kind of inefficient about the financial system. And it seemed just kind of like it wasn't keeping up with the rest of the world in terms of improving. It seemed like it was holding back innovation and people who were trying to do good things in the world. And so in 2010, I was home with my family for Thanksgiving. I was having kind of an introvert moment where I went off to my room to get away from everybody in my family for a little bit of alone time, and I started reading on the internet. I came across this paper, the Bitcoin white paper by Satoshi Nakamoto. And this spark kind of went off in my head. I was like, wow, this seems really important. Like, I didn't even really fully understand it the first time I read it, but it was talking about how the world could have something kind of like the internet that was decentralized and global, but instead of for moving information around, it was for moving value around and money around. And I got really excited because I felt like this might be part of the solution to make a financial system that was more fair and more efficient and open to everybody. And so I kind of couldn't stop thinking about Bitcoin for about a year, and I went to all these meetups in San Francisco, and I finally started coding a prototype on nights and weekends, which eventually ended up becoming Coinbase. This was a slide from our seed deck, our seed round pitch deck. And tonight, this is sort of the origin story of Coinbase. I want to tell you, just give you an update about our thinking. This is actually one of the first times we've shared this with an external audience. We're going to talk about just what we want to create in the world with this company, how we're actually going to get there, what are all the steps, and through these three sections. Okay, so I want to introduce you to this term, economic freedom. Economic freedom is something that a bunch of organizations out there, they try to measure about all the countries of the world, and they kind of rank them and they score them. And economic freedom measures a whole bunch of things. One of them is property rights, which is this idea that if you own something, can it be taken away from you without your permission? It also looks at how easy it is to send money and goods and services internationally. It checks, if you want to start a business, is there a lot of bureaucracy and paperwork, or do you have to bribe somebody to get a license or something like that, or can you just do it in a few days? It also looks at the inflation rate in countries. Some of you might have seen countries like Venezuela are going through hyperinflation, and people's wealth, especially the poorest people, tends to be eroded by inflation. It checks if you want to start a business or work at a business, how able to do that are you? And it even looks at things like corruption, are people having to pay bribes to get things done? And so economic freedom is this really broad term. People tend to think of it as it's sort of a measure of can you make money or what's the growth rate of the economy. And that's part of it, but it actually affects all sorts of things in these countries. And it's positively correlated with some things that you maybe wouldn't think of, like the income of the poorest people or how well the environment is treated. Even self-reported happiness, right? And it's negatively correlated with these things that we don't want less of, like corruption and even war. So you can see economic freedom in these countries. Again, here's Cuba. This was 60 years ago, and here it is in modern day, and it looks relatively the same. But by contrast, if you look at a country like Singapore, one of the highest economic freedom countries, 60 years ago it was this swampland, and now it's this bustling metropolis. And you can even see economic freedom from outer space. So this is North and South Korea. These two places have roughly the same natural resources and geography and everything, but it's just their difference in economic policies have created these dramatically different outcomes. And so economic freedom is getting better in the world very slowly. So over the last 25 years or so, it's gone up about 3 percentage points by this metric. But the vision for Coinbase is that we can actually change bend this curve and materially change the economic freedom of the entire world by what we're going to build. And that's what we're going to talk about next. So that's really the vision for Coinbase is creating more economic freedom for every person and business in the world over the next 10 years. All right, so what are we going to do to actually make that happen? Well, what we're going to do is create what we call the open financial system, which just means that we're going to use cryptocurrency and the smartphone revolution, things like that, to actually inject economic freedom into these countries all over the world. And it might not be immediately obvious to people. I know it wasn't for me. Why does cryptocurrency actually enable more economic freedom in the world? And if you go back to those things I mentioned at the beginning, some of the things that economic freedom measures, if you look at property rights, well, cryptocurrency actually is a great way to give people wealth that can't be taken away from them. There's user-controlled wallets, even these things called brain wallets, and even if you use the hosted wallets on Coinbase, oftentimes people still have much better property rights than they do in their home countries. In terms of free trade, well, cryptocurrency is inherently global. It works everywhere in the world. In terms of easier ways to start a business, cryptocurrency is democratizing the way that companies raise money, and you can accept payments globally from day one. Cryptocurrency is now even helping fight inflation. So stable coins are being sent into places like Venezuela. And people are able to start the companies that they want to start and work at them with smart contracts. Even corruption is being affected by cryptocurrency because there's also organizations where you want to have the entire thing be done out in the open, a public ledger, so that anybody can audit it to see where every payment's going. So cryptocurrency is a huge enabler of economic freedom, and it's also this other trend that's happening, which is the growth of smartphones. So increasingly, even the poorest people in the world have access to the internet and smartphones, and they can now have a bank in their pocket. That's really the opportunity. That's the secret that Coinbase is founded on, the belief that right now, at this moment in history, because cryptocurrency got invented and everybody in the world can have access to a smartphone, we can inject economic freedom really into all these countries around the world. So that's what we're actually building to make this vision a reality. We're going to help create that open financial system for the world. And I just want to go through the strategy now, because let's break that down. That's a pretty high-level goal. There's really a few ways that we're going to make that happen.